Hi, you are watching. This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing, and reincarnated into a god named Nebula, and he has to battle 27 other gods to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. In the previous chapter, Hui Xiao disclosed to Rakrak his awareness of the activities the Lizardmen and Gnolls were undertaking in secrecy, mentioning their involvement in the Succession War. Rakrak, initially taken aback, conceded that Hui Xiao's insights were accurate. He explained that engaging in this conflict was deemed the most prudent approach to claim automation, without incurring significant losses. And just 3 weeks ago, something happened that pushed them to this decision. Their respective gods chose to settle the territorial dispute through a unique skill known as the contradicting prophecy. Now on to the next part. Prophecy was a skill obtained when a player's divinity reached level 6. For example, a king received a divine message from a blind prophet saying that the king's son would kill the king and sleep with the king's wife to make the kingdom fall. The king was afraid of this prophecy, but couldn't bear killing his own son with his own hands, so he ordered one of his subordinates to kill his son instead. However, the subordinate couldn't find the courage to kill a baby, so the subordinate left the baby in a field, and the baby was found by a shepherd. As the baby grew into a young man, he heard a rumor saying that the parents he had now weren't his biological parents. He went to the prophet to find out the truth. The prophet said that as the price of telling him the truth, he would sleep with his biological mother and kill his biological father. Even though the young man still loved his current parents, they weren't his biological parents, and he left his hometown. He went on an adventure. While riding his wagon on the road, he fought and defeated a king that wouldn't get out of his way, and he even fought a monster threatening the kingdom, which had the head of a human and the body of a lion. As a reward for killing the monster, he married a queen, who had lost her husband and became a king. Several years later, he found out that the prophecy he had tried to avoid had already been fulfilled. The king he had met and killed on the road was his biological father, and the king's wife, who he got married with, was his biological mother. Then, after the queen found out about this herself, she cancelled her subscription to life, and he, the current king, dug out his eyes and walked out of the palace. The kingdom eventually fell. This is prophecy. But unlike the confusing example, the skill was rather simple. A player would set a quest for themselves and their species to predict what would happen in the future, and if the prophecy was fulfilled, they would receive the faith points they spent to give a divine message to their tribe, as well as a reward depending on the difficulty of fulfilling the prophecy. For example, Nebula predict that Rakrak would kill an abomination, and if he helps Rakrak fulfill the prophecy, he would get a good amount of XP. However, players of the Lost World didn't use this skill as much, because there's a penalty if the prophecy isn't fulfilled. If lots of faith points were used to make a big prophecy, the penalty when it wasn't fulfilled would be that much more extreme. The faith points used would definitely go to waste. XP could decrease, causing the player's level to go down, and if the player was unlucky, their characters that were involved could be cursed as a penalty, or they would encounter an unexpected negative event. If the creator can't even control their own destiny, it means that they aren't qualified to be a god. Therefore, no matter how simple the prophecy was, players would commit to fulfilling them. Prophecies that were too simple weren't used too often either because the amount of faith points returned would be less than the original amount used. But it's still used when necessary. If the player is confident, and in Nebula's opinion, the best time to use prophecy was now. A contradicting prophecy was when two players made prophecies that contradicted each other's. For example, player A and player B would make a prophecy about individual C. Player A would predict that C would die within 3 days, and player B would predict that C would still be alive after 3 days. Player A would try their best to kill C in the next 3 days, and player B would use every means to protect C from dying. That way, only one of player A or player B would fulfill their prophecy, and the other would fail. Thus one would get a reward, while the other would receive a penalty. This kind of bet is also possible without making prophecies, but contradicting prophecy is directly supported by the game system, so there's no loophole, and the loser would for sure receive a penalty. Unlike making a bet with words, with a contradictory prophecy set up, the loser would still be penalized, even if they found the game disagreeable. Therefore, it would be a much more advantageous situation to win, and regardless of the possibility of his opponent disagreeing with the outcome of the bet, Nebula simply wanted to see a clear benefit if he won. However, that wouldn't happen unless one was a fool. Even if it were Nebula, he would have Ratchrach pullback. Hegemonia's ears-cut tribe have settled down quite far away, so it seems that Hegemonia had contradicting prophecy in mind to begin with. Now that the player got to wrap their minds about their circumstance, Hegemonia then asked what prophecy should they decide on, which was odd thing to ask since the answer was obvious, so he replied with a question. Asking Hegemonia if he knows about the Lord of Automation is currently deciding on his successor, to which he laughs and answered that he was. So it seems like Hegemonia is playing tricks with him, to see how much he knows about automation. Still, Nebula decided not to press that much, and decided to get on with it. As this succession war is the most suitable event for their contradicting prophecy, as automation chooses its owner on a regular basis, and that person would become the Lord of Automation. Apparently, the period the Lord can remain in power is different every time, and only the Lord of Automation at that time knows how long their term is, and based on some information Nebula had gathered, he concluded that's why Huizio, the Lord of Automation, has been acting as the Lord while hiding his identity. Because if people find out when the next successor needs to be chosen, many would seek the position of Lord of Automation, and what's important is that the time to decide the next successor is almost here, and the current Lord wants to give his spot to one of his children, and there is currently 5 potential successors, and if they pick one of the 5 children, and predict which son or daughter is going to be the next successor, since there's only going to be one, the prophecies would inevitably contradict each other, and if both of us foolishly guess wrong, then they just accept that as is. Which Hegemonia like. But Nebula realized something after seeing Hegemonia so willingly accept the challenge, so it seems like he also prepared in advance, but still, Nebula thought Hegemonia wouldn't have prepared as much as he had. This wasn't a new scenario for Nebula, he had foreseen an event like this unfolding for quite some time. While Nebula pondered their strategic postures, Hegemonia was eager to demonstrate the extent of his preparations. He boasted about his in-depth research, claiming to have detailed information on the 5 successors. Hegemonia offered to share this knowledge with Nebula, presenting it as though he was doing Nebula a favor, but Nebula already knew very well about the Lord's children, but still he was curious about Hegemonia's perspective, so Nebula played along, and accepted Hegemonia's offer as if it was genuinely beneficial to him. Thus, Hegemonia proceeded with the introduction. The first child, who is named Dan, is a man in his early 30s. He has a strong physique and is trusted by Huizio. He's also pretty smart. 2 out of the 4 royal families support him, and he is the most likely to become Lord. The second child is named June, a man in his late 20s. He has a different mother from the first child. He is considered weak and doesn't really show himself to others. There are rumors saying he's not interested in becoming successor, though there is a family that supports him. His mother's family, the third child, is named Jean, a woman in her late 20s. She has the same mother as the first child and tends to go out a lot. She is hiding her identity, but she gets along well with hunters and ruffians. She's supported by the remaining family of the 4. The fourth child is named Cheong, a woman in her early 20s. She has a different mother from the first and second child, but her mother has already passed away, and Cheong was cursed. There's something unusual about her, because of that she's alienated not only by the Lord, but the other family members as well. Lastly, the 5th child named Min, a girl in her mid-teens. People say she has extraordinary intelligence and is talented in many ways. The Lord had the youngest at his old age, so it seems that she is adored by him. After that introduction, Hegemonia asked Nebula if they should choose right away, or does he need time to take in the information. To his surprise, Nebula already has a candidate in mind, so he accepted to decide it now. Furthermore, Nebula knows that if he took time to think, that would also be giving time to Hegemonia, and that was an unnecessary thing to do. And just to be sure that he won't be outsmarted by Hegemonia, Nebula continued to suggest to write down their predictions separately and check if they chose the same ones. The contradicting prophecy won't go through anyways, and they can just click no, and if they choose a different successor, they can click yes and start. Which Hegemonia agreed, and so Nebula promptly operated the system window. After that, Hegemonia proudly showed his chosen prophecy, Huizio's second child, Huijun. This was such an unexpected pick, but Nebula's choice proved even more surprising as he chose Huijun's 4th child, Huijun, and Nebula knows this as well, so he checked Hegemonia's face, and as he expected, he couldn't tell what he was thinking, because of that damn helmet that he was wearing. However, his finger froze was more than enough of an answer. Hegemonia didn't expect this outcome, but now that he sees it's different, Nebula clicked yes and informed Hegemonia about it, which Hegemonia tried to hide his shock in his voice by trying to reply calmly but failed to do so. Still, after he recovered his confidence, he hit the system message with their gauntlet-covered hand, and with this, the contradictory prophecy was approved, and the 2 prophecies began to spread among automation from an unknown source. The Lord of Automation, Huijun, tried to ignore the prophecies at first, as he thought that the families must have done something again, and they're rumors that'll die down over time. However, the prophecies did not die down, and in everyone's mind was the same. They are wondering why is it June and Kyung. Contrary to what the other family members thought, the prophecy stated that Huizio wasn't going to select his first son Dan as his successor. Even the people had been talking among themselves that either the first child, or the third child would become the successor, so the rumors spreading about the prophecies were somewhat suspicious. With this, Huizio eventually hired someone to find the source of the prophecies. It took quite a while, and Huizio had to look into it a few times himself, but the source couldn't be found. It seemed impossible to Huizio, both the children and the families were confused, as they knew the time to select the successor was approaching soon. Huizio succeeded in getting rid of the rumors within the automation castle, but this time, something came from the outside. The four families heard news that the ears-cut tribe and black-scaled lizardmen were approaching the castle. Huizio knew they would come someday, but coming at times like this means they decided to take over the automation. And the worst-case scenario would be the two tribes forming an alliance and attacking automation, but that didn't seem to be the case. Huizio got people to get information on both tribes, and he found out that both tribes believed in different gods. The two tribes didn't hate each other, but they were still hostile towards the other tribe and considered them rivals they would one day fight. Both are huge tribes that he can't trifle with. They probably think that the wilderness is too small for both to live in, and that only one tribe should have it. While they humans are barely surviving in the automation castle, and Huizio knew that he had to do his best in fulfilling his last duty as Lord of Automation and decided to risk his life for it. That's why he had visited the two tribes, as there's definitely a connection between the movement of the two tribes and the successor and rumors. Huizio was confident, but it was confidence that he was hopeless. And just like that, after meeting with the two tribe leaders, Huizio confirmed his hopelessness, and it was Huizio who first felt that the warmth in the tent was fading, but Huizio just endured the cold air. The fire was dying. Rakrak looked at the dying fire. He broke a few of the dry branches next to him and crushed them in his palms before throwing them into the fire. Thus reviving it, the fire began to spread and burn the thicker branches that weren't burning before. Rakrak then spoke up, putting the matters of diplomacy and reputation aside. He believes that everything about this is simple, but Huizio's silence implied disagreement. And so Rakrak continued, elaborating to Huizio how simple it was, and that he just needs to choose between one or the other. Salkite or him, the gnolls, or lizardmen, the angry teeth god or the blue insect god, but Huizio's viewpoint remained unchanged, stating that it's not that simple, as it's not just simply choosing between the two. Others would think he is asking him to choose between two precious gifts. But in reality, it's more like a question of which would hurt less if a saber-toothed tiger and cockatoo appeared, and he had to put his head into one of their mouths, and Rakrak pities Huizio for thinking that way. But he expressed that it would be better to put his head into the cockatoo's mouth, to which Huizio countered that Salkite also said that the saber-toothed tiger would be better. With this, Rakrak decided to think from Huizio's perspective. Huizio wouldn't believe any of the sweet words that Salkite and Rakrak said anyways. And his doubt was likely the reason why automation had been protected until now, and so he just asked him what he's planning to do now, which he replies that he will just take a step back for now. Then both saber-toothed tiger and cockatoo might fight each other to eat him. There's probably gonna be a winner in the end, but the winner will likely be exhausted, or hurt, and he wishes they would rather be half dead. That would give him more options, and the true colors of the winner will be shown. As long as they're exhausted, there will still be more ways to fight. And Rakrak easily understood Huizio's analogy. He's saying that he'll decide what to do once the successor is selected, because the distance between them and the successor is greater than the distance between the successor and automation. So he's thinking that he can use a hostage to do what he wants. However, a successor must be chosen no matter what, and the time to choose is almost here. As he was thinking this, Huizio then asked, what does he think about his decision? To which Rakrak answered that it doesn't seem too bad. It would be fine if he truly doesn't care who wins between them, which Huizio immediately answered that is because he thinks they are the same. But Rakrak argued that he might think that way, but what Huizio just said to him sounds a lot more like he's saying that, there's nothing much he can do, and he has just accepted his fate as a stone on the board. He thinks it's too late now, but in reality there were other ways he could have gone about this matter. And wouldn't it have been better to look more into both tribes and see which one was better? If only he realized sooner that he wouldn't be able to avoid both of them. And Rakrak could see his words stung Huizio's heart, so in the end, Rakrak said that sometimes doing nothing and waiting to see how things unfold can be the smartest move, and Huizio appreciated the acknowledgement, but this marked the end of the conversation. Before parting, Huizio posed one final question, because in the end, it's not only him who's a stone, but they are as well. The only difference between them is that the board they are on is bigger, so he wonders if they are scared by that, feel pain or even helplessness. Aren't they just a plaything of the gods as well? But this just made the corners of Rakrak's lips slightly bent up, and with that, Huizio knew Rakrak didn't think that way. However, he couldn't guess Rakrak's answer to his question, and it didn't help when Rakrak mentioned that he would answer his question once this is all over. And with this, Huizio walked out of the tent. No one stopped or looked at Huizio strangely, as if Rakrak had already said something to them. Huizio suddenly had the thought that this was his chance to spy on the Lizardmen, but he abandoned it. It's not important anymore. His heart was filled with complicated feelings. It might have been due to his loss of moralis. Just like Rakrak said, Huizio had experienced this kind of situation in the past, and he knew that he had to set things straight one by one, rather than doing what his heart told him to. Huizio passed through the tents and walked out into the wilderness. He looked at the stars. He at least knew how to tell directions from the stars. After he walked 2 hours in the direction he chose to go in, he met his nephew Huewu, who was waiting for him along with 4 subordinates and 6 horses. Huizio then took off his leather hood and began to take off the old clothes that he wore on this trip, and took out a blade from his pocket. The blade was sharp, and he held it to his neck. Slowly, he moved the blade along his skin and shaved his dampened beard. It didn't take too long. It was far from Huizio's first time shaving, and he was proficient at it. Huizio had a great influence on the impressions a person gave off, and it was a good thing to have when going under disguise. Huizio shaved off his whole beard without leaving any cuts on his skin. Then he put on the layers of silk clothes his subordinate held up for him. Huizio, with his beard shaved and dressed in proper clothes, now appeared as the Lord of Automation he had presented to the residents of the castle from afar. And so Huizio got on his horse and continued their journey towards automation. Huizio took the lead with Hugh riding after him, and the subordinates rode after Hugh. Hugh suddenly got hit with a drop of water on his face, but when he looked up, the sky was clear. Hugh looked straight ahead again, then another drop of water landed on his cheek. Huizio was the only one riding ahead of him, and unlike Rak and the other lizard men, Hugh knew reputation well, and reputation wasn't as easy and simple as the lizard men thought. And so Hugh ordered his subordinates to slow down a little. With this, the distance between Huizio and his subordinates grew further, and Hugh no longer got hit with drops of water, protecting his lord's reputation. 3 weeks ago, when the 2 prophecies of the gods began to spread, a woman was climbing a bedrock with her bare hands. Her palms were already cut open, and blood was trickling down her arms. By the looks of how good at climbing she was, she seemed to be talented at it. But at the moment, she seemed to be atypical in many ways other than her injured hands. Her left ankle was very swollen. Fortunately, the woman had a good sense of balance. She shifted her center of gravity onto her left ankle, which was barely on a ledge, and was able to properly grab the real ledge that was hidden under the rock. But as she put her weight onto her swollen ankle, the pain she had forgotten about shot up her spine. She didn't cry in pain though. She calmly rested herself against the bedrock and mumbled while frowning, and cursing at that damn F******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** And the woman was none other than Huiziyoung, Huizio's fourth child. Hit that like button and thanks for watching.